several topics that were sent in that partners, you all, were very interested in discussing. So, at several of the tables, we have different signs. So I'm just going to walk over to a table and ask somebody from that table to read off their sign.
How are you encouraging your schools to input data? Something about electrical shocks. I don't know.
I think just the first part would be fine. All right. Over here, we've got another table. Please pay attention to where these tables are, okay? Over at this table.
Yes, here we have connecting with ESSPs, bridging the protocols with the ESSPs. How do you do it?
Awesome. Okay, now be listening for what you're ready to go run to whatever table to have a little discussion, all right? Over at this table, what do we have here? Lori, can you read yours off?
What training resources are needed?
All right, thank you, Lori. Have I hit this table yet? Scott?
How are teachers and students using data?
Did everybody hear that one? One more time, Scott.
How are teachers and their students using data?
All right. How are teachers and their students using data? And how about this table over here, Robin?
How is your partnership funding Globe?
All right. Did I hit all of them? Did I get every one of the tables? Any table that you didn't get to announce what your discussion topic is? All right, great. Okay, what we'd like you to do is to go to the table right now that has the topic you'd like to discuss, and we'll have flip charts at that table and markers, and we'd like you to take a few notes, and then we're going to ask you to get up and change and go to a different table in a few minutes, okay? So, get ready, set, go. Ten minutes.
Nobody from here even moved. I don't want to stay at the data entry table. Because there's nothing happening there. Because there's nothing happening there.
Okay, so what training resources are needed? And where are the notes supposed to be?
Well, they were bringing them about a board.
Oh,
We can write on flip chart stuff.
People?
Yeah. People.
Trainers?
I've often wished for an inventory of training materials, the big boxes, the kits, organized by investigations and protocols that I have.
You mean the equipment?
Yeah, kind of the equipment, but beyond more than the equipment, background activities.
Okay.
You know, teachers develop units,
Right.
and then they put them in a box.
Right.
It's an elementary teacher thing. So there is so much that gets developed and then developed again and then developed again. So I don't know how you say that, but that's what I mean. Sure, I'll be fried. Right. And you have markers right there. Right. And I know another thing that I wish for sort of along.
right. We have had great discussions, and now it's time to hear some of the report outs from our discussion groups. So if I can ask everyone to go back to their, or stay put, I don't care. We'll go ahead and go around the room to each of the tables. I'll give about a minute for everybody to get settled. Okay, so we're going to have a report out from the moderator from each table will be so kind, I hope, to read through some of the topics that were recorded down on the flip charts. And I'd like to ask that if you were at that table and you added to those comments, to please speak up. We'll pass the microphone around if we didn't capture your thought. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and just start with this table. Do you have a reporter here?
Okay, our question, once again, and I'll try not to be a smart aleck. Okay. How are you encouraging your schools to input data? I know. And the folks from Globe at night said that one of the ways they encourage schools is if they collect X amount of data, they get a nice little map with all their data in their area, and that's one way. One way that was fairly clear, although there are some pedagogical issues with it, is automate the data. Another was to bypass the teacher, and in many cases, students or volunteers or others could actually continue to enter data. One of the things is looking at the culture of the teacher. You know, they work in units, and when they're done with all the units that deal with weather or land cover or whatever, they tend to move on to those units. And then so one of the others was if there were multiple uses of data, so if let's say you looked at a curriculum scope and sequence for a year, where all could weather data be used, in what units? And then rather than say you're collecting weather data all the time, you're collecting that data to support this unit, same data to support another unit, and then kind of like what National Geographic used to do way back when in the 90s when the internet was really bad, but you have thematic sort of little things that tie to common curriculum sort of standards in science, or it could be social studies. So anyway. Sure. No, we're good. I can tell jokes? Okay.
Okay, our table discussed how's your partnership funding Globe. Well, we articulated the problem. Times are tough. Partners need to find their own funding. Apache Network, that means that you have some very, very active and then some not so active. And then as Todd brought up, each partnership they serve different masters. So looking at solutions, somebody put a lot of luck, but they talked about looking at the corporate responsibility tie-in to power companies with local issues. We did a lot of that. Go to the help desk. They have funding updates. They will write you letters of support. There was a question that there was a point made that Globe GPO could serve as a clearinghouse for those scientists who are looking for outreach to support their mission. The environment. This was really good. Kathy brought this up. An environmental license plate. What they did is they, you get a group to support a bill, and so there was an environmental license plate, and that money went to wildlife and fisheries, and so in a grant program. And Peter was telling us that they did the same thing using an income tax checkoff. Then MSPs. Kathy and Peter both used those. This was the big thing we were discussing at the end. Do we need a new model? And so we said, okay, a lot of people talked about the fact that if we went back to this whole idea of train the trainer and have trainers and then have trainers training teachers, et cetera, should we go back to the model that there are funds coming from the top, from the GPO or an office of training that could be applied for. So those were the different things that we talked about. And
Thank you, Sheila. Todd has a comment.
Yeah, I wanted to add a side conversation that happened while they were discussing that last piece, which bears on it, and that is that while a lot of scientists are looking for an outreach component, I think scientists are aware of GLOBE, but they look at the GLOBE structure and say, well, this is too big for my particular outreach. And maybe we need to start marketing to scientists who are looking for outreach that the appropriate level to connect with is the partnerships. Find a couple partnerships who can help develop the materials that can then be extended outward, and maybe we can market that way.
That's a great additional comment. Sheila, can you add that to your chart so we don't lose that thought? Wasn't talked about?
We've been pretty successful in raising money, but we never asked for money for GLOBE. We asked for money to do things like improve the STEM pipeline, get more girls involved with science, things like that. And I know that when I review proposals for different groups, if you're asking money to support my GLOBE program, that's not looked on the same way as using GLOBE as the vehicle to solve some other greater good. And I think part of that's just knowing how to ask for money, but it's a strategy. But I do see that it's easier to meet someone's needs and then say, oh, and I can use this program to do this, and then they're more likely to give you money.
All right, great comments. So, shall we move to another group? Martos?
Yes, so our group was connecting with the SSPs, bridging the protocols between the SSPs, and making them more relevant for GLOBE in general. So I know that many of you can't see. I don't know which side to stand on here. I'll just highlight a few things. We kind of did a string of thoughts that were recorded here. I think one of the big points that came up in the multiple rounds here was that the ESSP materials simply need to be available. It's been a long time coming. They need to be there so that you as partners, teachers, can use them, that you know exactly what they are, how they can be used. A big part of that was the notion that you might want to map the ESSP topics to all the GLOBE protocols and make that mapping available and clearly and obviously visible so that people could see that if you're involved in one or doing one type of ESSP topic, you can also be integrating protocols in ways 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever those might be. So making the protocols available and tied to the teacher's guide in that regard. The elementary connection to the SSPs was mentioned also, that the SSPs were largely designed for higher level students, but that there are actually obvious connections that can be made back to the elementary level students as well, and that is something that would help. There was also just a generalized question of the mechanism for creating new protocols, and it kind of mentioned from a couple different perspectives. For example, how might students that want to do research that would first involve GLOBE protocols, but what happens if they want to move beyond that and do more creative scientific research of their own? What is the role that might be? Maybe not in the way that we think of protocols, of going into the big database and serving the big GLOBE and scientific purpose, but what are the roles of students being able to generate their own scientific methods as well? And kind of an adaptation, not related to the last comment, but that CloudSat, for example, as a Earth System Science project funded by NASA, not NSF, took some of the existing Globe protocols and actually added more, if you will, requirements to the protocols to make those data available and useful, both from the science perspective as well as the Globe perspective. And there's a unified data reporting system, basically. So if they're reporting to the CloudSat site, that data is automatically being uploaded and integrated into the Globe database as well. I'm just going to make sure I get through the main points here. Oh, and these 3M charts, I tell you. And a big part of making the SSPs more integrated is to make them more inviting. There's a general perception that was raised several times that by having the SSPs be a complete product, be thoroughly clarified in terms of what they do, what they don't do, and have a mechanism by which teachers, partners can utilize them in a clear way is something that would be needed. There are also some side discussions that went on just in terms of how to make protocols in general more useful. I think one comment that's relevant to share with everybody is that there are, from an implementation perspective, some schools struggle with the time required to complete a single protocol. And Globe could make that more usable by people if we developed ways or better instructions on how to break it down, how to implement it in the classroom. Any comments from anybody else that was on the...
I was stuck at this table, so one of the things too is that I think Globe, there's the base level set of protocols, right? And I'm studying something. Then if I do all that stuff and I want to connect it on, how do I connect it on to, let's say, a NASA data set that will let me answer the next upper level question or NOAA data set? We were talking about the buoy system, that you can go out and look at that. I can't go out and do my own buoys, I guess I could if I had a boat, but you get the idea.
Yeah, and that was something that was actually mentioned too. It was the tie into other accessory or ancillary data sets as well. Any other comments?
I just sat down.
Uh-oh.
You want me to hold it?
Well, yeah. I don't know. Do we have good news to share? Our question was, how are teachers and students using data? So here's some great ideas. Some of this is real. We know for sure that some teachers are doing this. Helping students understand graphed data. Trends and interpolation, extrapolation, etc. Just using their own Globe data. We gathered it. Here's our data. Now what can we do with it? Obviously, it's super important in any science to be able to understand the tool that is graphing and charting. And here's another one that I think probably a lot of people do. And any time you were initially trained, you probably saw the trainer pull up a couple of Globe Schools data that were a nice, continuous, long data set, and you looked at maybe temperature at a school in the northern hemisphere versus the southern hemisphere, and looked at seasons and began to ask questions. That's great. There are a few schools with really long data sets, and we probably all use them to do that. Here's an idea put forth: scenario-based learning. Now, I haven't done this, but I guess one of our people have. Susan. Okay. So Susan says scenario-based learning. Say asking a question of groups of students. Say, I want you to go find what month has the most cloud cover in Hawaii, and why, maybe, or how is that happening? So we can ask questions, and the students can go and find the data. Obviously, you have to have an internet connection, and I don't know if you're working with groups of whole class or a small group, or whether it's all teacher-led or not. Here's some suggestions, though, of how to use the data. I think all of us were talking about maybe the need to reinforce this connection between the student and the data they collect. And that's the really strong thing about Globe, is that students collect and own this data. They're very proud of it. Sometimes, well, we know not all teachers enter the data, and that's my point at the bottom. So there's a lot of data that's probably floating out there that teachers and their students are using. Those students have some ownership of that data, but maybe if we could provide opportunities for them to share questions, strategies, explorations through social networking, even recording little podcasts on some, if we had a muckathon or something like that, or related to one of the other protocols, some, event where everybody was going out and doing stuff, and they can record podcasts or Skype in or something like that. Yes, I think that's maybe it. Oh, wait, bottom. Because we have a little bit of a cumbersome, little bit outdated Globe data entry deal. I think this really does get in the way. If teachers have a hard time figuring out how to enter the data, then they're typically not going to feel good about assigning their students the task of doing it if they don't know how to do it. I would bet that there's many more times the number of data points that teachers are holding on to that they just haven't put up there. But we all know that anyway. So hopefully we're working to that.
All right. Great. Thanks, Scott. Okay, I think we have one more group. Correct? Marcia, did you want to read for your table? Do we have Lori?
The question that we were working with was addressing the resources needed for training, and one of the first points that was brought up was identifying model schools where Globe is being implemented well in schools so that new people could go to those sites and see how Globe is used in those sites. Human resources, we talked about the need for more trainers. Materials, one of the ideas was kits organized by protocols or by the investigations, and it's more than just the equipment, not just the thermometers or the soil augers, but also looking at, I think we talked about a scope and sequence of ways to implement the kit-based materials based on the protocols and investigations by grade levels. We had a suggestion on the Meet the Alumni, having those students who are now out there, how Globe has affected them, having their stories to personalize the program. Though oftentimes stories also encourage more people to be involved. Master trainers recertification and how to bring in new trainers, continuing to work on that. And I think that goes back to some of the discussion that Sheila's group had with looking at the funding for trainers. Online refresher courses and resources. Digital versus analog. Teaching the concepts behind the technology. And I think one of the conversations we had a little later was that this might be developmentally appropriate as well. Elementary, it may be important for them to understand how to use and conduct different tests. By the time they're in middle and high school, they've built some of the concepts behind it so they understand what the probe is measuring, whereas if a first grader uses a probe, it may not mean anything to them at all. And then money, successful models with partners for how funding is identified, and then repositories of teacher-developed activities.